Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 35 of the Wellness Foreplay podcast. We are Dr. Dondi and Marcy
Hi,
Nettles.
guys.
We are your hosts, and we're excited. We're going to be talking about something sweet today.
We all love sweet things, right?
We do.
You're so sweet. I love it. So, guys, this podcast really came about because we had the understanding that people were not necessarily aware of the knowledge that would really give them their superpower, their ability to make the best choices for themselves. So what we decided to do, with me being a former police detective and you,
I'm a former family wellness chiropractor.
we wanted to bring our expertise and, what we've done for a really long time together to be able to do some investigations for you, to be able to come up with simple ways for you to understand maybe better about what might be hijacking your roadway and your path to health and wellness, and give you some simple things that you could implement into your lives to be able to help you. And so we decided that we wanted to create this podcast, this platform, Wellness Foreplay, play on words there, right? Because knowledge is definitely what is the precursor to your best wellness. So what we do is we create one topic with 4 questions that we answer. And today's topic is sugar.
Sugar.
All about sugar today. So we are super excited that you're joining us. We do this podcast kind of a little different. We actually go live on both of our profiles on Facebook as well as in YouTube. So hello to all of our live viewers. But then we upload it to all of the podcast platforms. So if you're one of our listeners, we appreciate you and thank you so much. Absolutely. So are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Let's get started. All right. So the 4 questions that we're going to have today for episode 35 topic sugar is the first one. What are the different kinds of sugar? And are there some that are healthier than others? Question 2 is what happens to the sugar we consume? Question 3, why do we think we need something sweet? And question 4, what can high levels of sugar consumption lead to? All right.
Not good things.
No, not good things at all. So let's go ahead and let's get started here with question number 1. So what are the different kinds of sugar, and are there some that are healthier than others? There's a lot of different sugars out there. Oh my gosh. And I would actually say that it's confusing because I've heard so many different things about sugar, right? It's like the white sugar's bad for you, brown sugar's better, honey's best. But hey, then there's molasses. That's good too. Maple syrup. What agave?
Right.
There's so many different options. There's even blue packets. There's pink packets, and that's
yellow packets and white packets.
I know. There's just so much out there. Would you agree that it can be kind of confusing?
If you're a label reader, how do you know? What is a sugar? It's very simple. Look at the last 3 letters. If they end in O-S-E, the oses, those are the sugars. Things like fructose, maltose, sucrose, galactose, cellulose, dextrose. Those are all sugars. And so if you're not sure what you're reading is a sugar, if it ends in OSE, it's a sugar.
Yeah. So the most common sugars that we know about are white sugars. White sugars that come from sugar cane, right? It was really interesting.
Sugar,
to see where that sugar really comes from the canes, and how you actually have to go through this whole process of stripping it out and to process it. And then that actually is kind of changing what the actual original intent of the product was in the first place.
Or it moves the fiber.
Yeah.
And the nutrients, and it's just what you're left over with is the energy.
Yeah, and that's a big one. And we're going to be talking about that here in just a second. So when we're talking about sugars, basically, there are some that are better for you than others. The lower amount of sugar that you can consume in your diet, the better, because we're going to talk about some things that sugar consumption leads to that is not good for you, not good for you now, not good for you long term. But I would say that the number one and the best sugar that you can actually consume is going to be a fruit sugar.
Fruit, yep.
Yeah, and in actual
vegetables
fruit
too, but fruits
form.
are sweeter.
Yeah. So there's a difference between consuming an orange and drinking orange juice. And that is the fiber
The fiber and the nutrients.
Yeah.
The density is really what it is.
Yeah. And what really stops you from eating more of it, and that's the fiber, right? Because once you start feeling full, but if you're drinking orange juice, you can drink quite a bit of that stuff and get a lot of
And there's
sugar.
a reason for that. A lot of the sugars that come from juices or sugary drinks, they actually block something called leptin. Leptin is a chemical in your body that actually gives you the sensation of fullness, or triggers or allows your body to feel full. And when you block the leptin pathway, you're taking in more consumption of calories and more consumption of calories, but you're not feeling full, so you keep doing it. That can be problematic, especially in the long term, especially if it's a daily practice.
And what's bad is that I love sugar. I've always loved sugar. I love sweet things. I love pastries. I love just the silkiness. I love chewy candies. I mean, I could go on and on about the sugar that I love, right? Yeah, you're totally a chocolate person.
Those other things, not so much.
Yeah, but why do we love them so much? And we're going to get into that in one of our questions here too. But first of all, just sugar in itself, anything in itself. We're not telling you that you have to cut out 100% sugar from your diet, because everything within moderation is acceptable. You just have to know what's actually a moderate amount of sugar. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's not very much. And what we consume on a daily basis is ridiculous, because there's so many sugars that are hidden, because sugar is in everything.
Yeah. And if you go by the authorities out there, like the World Health Organization, for example, they say that ideally no sugar is best because you don't need it, but you like it. But they said to shoot for 6 teaspoons of sugar, or the equivalent of 6 teaspoons of sugar, which is about 12 grams, which is about 1 can of soda per day. Most Americans, and I can't speak for any other country but most Americans go by far past that, which you just have to kind of look around at the average American, and we have a little bit more density,
cushioning.
Perhaps a little more cushioning. Great way to put it. Much more politically correct to say cushioning. So we have a little more cushioning around our waist than probably other maybe European people, and I'm generalizing. But we are very overfed and undernourished here in the US, and a lot of it's carbohydrates, which is really where the sugars come from, the carbohydrates. You don't get sugars from proteins, and you don't get it from fat unless you break down the fat. We can talk about that. I will talk about that actually, but it's the carbohydrates, it's the sugars.
Okay, guys. So before we move on to question number 2, share this out. And if you are listening, share, guys, because not very many people understand the basics of sugar and what really happens inside of our bodies and what it leads to, and how we can actually control it, and maybe even use some natural sources to be able to sweeten things as we go along. But are you ready to go on to question number 2?
I'm ready.
All right. So question number 2 is, what happens to the sugar we consume? That's a really good question.
Burns up.
It does. It's actually, sugar's a really great energy source, so if you've got something that's going to take a lot of energy and you consume some sugar beforehand, it's going to help you have that energy that you need to go out and just, blast out whatever you need to accomplish, right?
Like your sets in the gym. You blast those out. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Again,
as your
I'm working
partner,
on 1% better every single day. 1% better, right? But the thing is that if we don't use that energy from the sugar, it goes somewhere, and it doesn't. Yeah, around my butt, around my hips, around my belly, everywhere, guys. That's where the sugar goes.
Well, I'm actually going to be specific and give you and actually share with you guys where it goes.
Okay, so he's gonna give you the geeked out version. I just gave you the version, the
lay translation version, the true version,
the visual version, right, is what I just gave you, because it's what happens to all of us, right? So what happens?
Well, when you take in, so it's carbohydrates. Ultimately, sugars are a carbohydrate. So your body needs energy. It needs fuel. Your body takes the dietary carbohydrates that you eat, whether it's something like a piece of fruit or some broccoli or a pastry or a candy or chocolate in my situation, or a donut, whatever your source of carbohydrate is, your body breaks it down. When you start to chew in your mouth, there's something called salivary amylase. It's an enzyme that breaks down the starches, breaks down the sugars into something that you can utilize. And what we utilize is called glucose. Breaks it down into glucose. Glucose is the preferential fuel of our body, and it's what is actually needed for the mitochondria to make the ATP. So glucose is brought into the cell, absorbed by the mitochondria. A couple chemical reactions happen, and ATP is the outcome. ATP is adenotriphosphate. It is the cellular energy that we need, but it starts as the sugar that we eat, the carbohydrates that we eat. And once our body has utilized the ATP based on the needs, the energy demands of the body, it doesn't need anymore, but it has a couple different processes that it does. Once the consumable sucrose or glucose rather, the consumable glucose has been used and turned into ATP. The first is it turns it into amino acids. So the excess glucose can actually be turned into amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of protein to help build molecules of protein. That's the first. The other is it can be turned into something called glycogen. So glucose, excess glucose that's left over after your ATP is produced and your body has used the energy, then your body can store the glucose to convert it to glycogen and store it in your liver for later use. So when you have your blood sugar goes down and you need more glucose, but you haven't had a meal for a while, the liver will kick in and turn that glycogen back into glucose to allow your cells to absorb it, turn it into ATP, and use the energy. Well, there's another pathway too. It's called lipogenesis. This is literally turning the excess sugar, once it goes from glucose to glycogen, is stored in the liver. If there's still more, then it gets turned into fat, or it gets turned into glycogen and amino acids, which gets turned into triglycerides, which gets put into your fat cells. Consider your fat cells like a balloon. They literally have an unlimited capacity to store things like sugar and turn it into fat. So it's interesting because we thought a couple decades ago that you eat a lot of fat, your body turns to fat. Not the case. You eat a lot of sugar, your body turns over what is left over into fat. Sugar leads to fat much, much quicker than fat leads to fat. But that was the fallacy that we were taught. And then the other thing is if your liver is stacked up with glycogen, then your fat cells are stacked up with glycogen and amino acid that turn into triglycerides. There's another thing, dumping it over into your kidneys. And this is something interesting. I remember dumping it into your kidneys and then dumping it into the urine. There's big, big, big piles of excess glucose that gets dumped into your urine, especially if it is a habitual daily thing. High consumption of sugar leads to obesity, leads to fat, which will lead to obesity, which can lead to diabetes. And we'll talk about these things as we get into question number 4. But this is something I remember talking to a friend of mine way back when I was probably in 5th or 6th grade. So this is probably back in the early 70s. And I remember my friend, because he was a doctor, or my friend's father was a doctor, and he was talking about somebody in their family. And I remember eavesdropping on this conversation. I thought it was really super gross. But they were talking about how they would test people this is when they called diabetes, before it was type 1 and type 2, they called it sugar diabetes. And he said the way they could tell if a patient had diabetes is they would collect a urine sample, and I'm not exaggerating, stick a finger in it, taste it. If it's sweet,
gross.
They've got diabetes. Because what happens when you've got excess, I know it is gross. I remember thinking as a kid, that's so gross. I don't think they do that anymore. But when there's excess sugar in the body and it's being used for ATP and there's still excess, it gets stored as glycogen in the liver. If there's still excess, it gets turned into amino acids in the muscles. If there's still excess, it gets turned into glycogen and amino acids and stored as fat in the fat cells. And if there's still excess, it gets dumped into the urine, which is a very, very common thing for diabetics. This is the thing. Diabetics often dump sugar into their urine or the sugar excess, because there's so much of it. There's not enough to burn it all up. It's got to be stored. And once the stores are done, it just dumps it out into the urine and out through the body.
Oh
So,
gosh.
pretty crazy.
Yeah. So puts whole new definition to sweet pea. Right? Or sweet tea even. Sorry guys.
She had to go there.
I am so bad. But when he's sitting there talking about, all of this really intellectual stuff, I was still thinking, yeah, lots of sugar turns to fat. Fat goes to my hips. Fat goes to my gut. Fat goes to my butt. Fat goes to my thighs, right? So,
Yeah.
and all of that causes a lot
Sweet
of,
pea.
oh yes, it's so bad. So the sugar that we consume initially is an energy source, but if we don't burn it all because we're consuming too much sugar, it turns into fat. It turns into these other problems that Dondi was just talking about. And question 4 is going to be a deeper dive into the problems that can happen there. So let's go ahead and let's hop into question number 3.
And that people will be surprised once we get into the biggest violators. Which is the biggest violator of sugar? Where we get our most sugar from?
Yeah. So question number 3 is, why do we think we need something sweet? So there's really kind of 2 different aspects to this. There's probably more than that, but just 2 kind of that we're going to cover right now. And the first one that I want to start off with, and then you can go into the brain part of it, but is, we're kind of trained to. Our taste buds are trained from the time we're little babies. I mean, there is sugar in everything that we feed our babies after breast milk, right? So whether you're using a milk substitute for your babies, there's sugar in there. The baby food that you feed to your babies, there's sugar in there. And it's added sugar, not just fruit sugar.
Added sugar is the key.
Yeah, so you have to be really, really cautious about what you're giving your babies, because not only are you setting them up for an addiction to sugar, which Dondi's going to talk about here, you're formulating their taste buds to think that the things that they eat need to be sweet, right? And sugar is hidden in everything, okay? You would be surprised. You go to the store and you start looking at the amount of sugar that is in things that is supposed to be savory foods, something that's not supposed to be sweet, and yet it has added sugar. Why? Well, first of all,
it's kind of like salt. It's a flavor enhancer. It makes it taste better.
Yeah. Well, it gets you to buy things that you normally, if it doesn't taste good to you, you're not going to buy it. And if your taste buds think that they need something sweet and you're getting just the vegetable flavor or something made without the sweetener added, then you're probably going to not buy it again because it didn't taste good to you.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of money that companies spend on research. Manufacturers of products spend lots and lots of money. They pay to researchers to actually help them develop the best tasting formula based on public opinion. So they have people that volunteer, go in as taste testers, and they try, like, say, 10 different versions of a chocolate pudding until they find out through a consensus of a group of people which one of these 10 formulations, all with a different, from no sugar to high sugar and everywhere in between, which one as a consensus is the one that people think tastes better. So sugar in a lot of things that would normally not be, and pudding is an obvious sweet thing, but there's a lot of other things that aren't sweet, like sauces. So we don't really think there's sugar in them. Like soups and sauces and condiments and things of that nature, the ones that taste the best, whatever that specific sweet spot is, for lack of a better word. Because you've got 10 different variations, whichever is the consensus for the sweet spot, the company makes that version, and that's very valuable information to them. Third-party research does, this is what we concluded is the best tasting formula by popular demand. Then they go put that one to production, and when they put it out to the market, it's already taste tested. People will buy it, have a favorable reaction, and go and buy it again. It's all about commerce. It's all about making money. But there's a lot that goes into it, and sugar is used very deliberately as a flavor enhancer for savory types foods that you wouldn't think would be sweet, which is really the part of the inherent problem. Because we're consuming lots of food that we don't think are sugar or have sugar, when in actuality they are. It's like, well, I don't eat sweets. I don't eat pastries. I don't eat candy. I don't eat these things, breads and pastas, but I'm still gaining weight. Well, look at the sauces. Look at the glazes. Look at the other additives. The savory ketchup is riddled with sugar.
That's horrible.
And so that's when you can be a healthy consumer. Read the labels. read the labels and find out what these ingredients are, especially in savory foods. But a lot of it is disguised. You'll see the OSEs, the OSE, a lot of it is in there to make it taste better. But you're like, oh my gosh, that is the equivalent of that, or cereal, like dry bran cereal. It doesn't taste sweet. In fact, it's kind of a little sour, but there's about the equivalent of a small bowl of unsweetened and dry bran flakes has about 3 teaspoons of sugar, rather, because it's a grain. It's got that in there.
And it's something that people would choose because they think it's healthy, right? It's bran.
But that's where you gotta be a really good healthcare consumer. But there's things that are overt, like, a chocolate glazed donut is obvious there's sugar in it, but there's other things that are clandestine. You're buying it and you're eating it. Pad Thai noodles, as an example, one of my favorites. One of my favorite meals is Pad Thai noodles. 9 teaspoons of sugar in an average bowl of Pad Thai noodles because of the pasta, and the glaze that comes on the Pad Thai noodles.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of hidden sugar. A hidden sugar and added sugar are the 2 biggest things for you to be aware of.
Yeah, they are. But then there's some that are just so blatant. When you said that would be surprised. And first of all, you need to talk about the brain. But let me finish this really quick. Yeah. This thought process. The things that we just buy into and we're okay buying it like multiple times a day and consuming it. Soda, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Anything, those sugary fizzy drinks that you drink. And by the way, you said that there's like 12 teaspoons of sugar in a soda, right? Guess what? That's in a can of soda. If that's one serving.
Right.
It's in a serving, guys, and we're drinking big gulps that are like 4 of the regular cans. And so 4 times 12 is 48 teaspoons of sugar in that one soda.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're drinking that every single day, guess what happens?
Some people drink multiple every day.
Yeah. Well, you get fat.
Yeah.
And we'll tell you that people that are overweight are having the most difficulty staying healthy.
Mm-hmm.
A
lot of it is because of clandestine sugar, the hidden sugar, but some of it's overt and obvious. And by far, the biggest violator of overt sugar is sugary drinks, sodas, energy drinks, fruit juices, things like that, riddled with sugar. Just cut back half of, if there's people that I know that drink a 12-pack a day of Mountain Dew a day. That's insane. And they wonder why they're gaining weight because there's no fat in this. Well, fat doesn't make you fat. Sugar makes you fat. And the ones that are the biggest violators are the sugary drinks, the energy drinks, the sodas, the juices, and things of that nature. So steer clear of that and just read the labels and learn how to read the labels. Look at sometimes it'll say, to disguise it, it'll say sugar percentage per serving, and you look closer at servings per container, 6. So multiply that many grams of sugar times 6, and you'll really see, because sometimes when they can disguise, they're not being, they're being clandestine, but they're not being untruthful.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out how to read the labels, how to do the math, how to multiply. So you realize if I'm drinking, because if you look at it, servings per container, most of the time, if you're looking, it's 1 serving to you, but it may say 6 or 4 or 2 or 3, whatever it is. We don't look at it, especially ice cream. For me, a half gallon is 1 serving, which is why it doesn't happen very often. Well, I've eaten a half a gallon of ice cream before.
But yeah.
But I'm giving you a crazy example.
But that also goes back to what you were saying about sugar actually stifling that, what did you call it, inside of us that helps
leptin.
us to understand whether we're full or not, right? That you'll eat more if you're eating sugary things than if you weren't.
That when I eat chocolate, my stomach has another area or another wing. It opens up. It only happens when I eat chocolate. I'm pretty convinced of that.
Yeah, okay.
Not truthfully. But I want to talk about the brain reward cascade, how sugar can literally become addictive. Mm-hmm. Like cocaine, like alcohol, like other types of drugs, because it creates a brain reward cascade where the reward is dopamine. Dopamine is something that we get. It makes us feel pleasurable. It makes us feel euphoric. And so it's sugar stimulates a part of your brain that acts like those other things. It's the brain reward cascade, and it lights up the space of your brain when we do like MRI studies as an example, and dopamine is released as an example. So as what happens, it's the reward for consuming the sugar. And so you like the feeling, so you take the drink, you eat the bite, whatever it is, dopamine is released, it makes you feel good. So you eat another one. And you eat another one. You're feeling good while you're becoming worse, and you're becoming unhealthy though you feel good. That's the trickery, and it just is what it is. It's kind of the flaw in our DNA. I believe God created us perfectly, but we can get ourselves into those situations where we have to be mindful and just learn to say no.
Well, think about it though. God created the fruit sugars, and those are the ones that are actually the best for you, right? So consume the ones in the form the way God created them, and you're going to be okay within measure, right? So again, that's that serving size. That's another thing that we could totally talk about too another time is serving sizes, right? Because we way too often will double or triple the serving sizes. And that's why, over the ages, we've doubled and tripled some of our body sizes.
You know what though? So, based on that serving size and all that, did you realize if you're eating fruit and vegetables, the sugar doesn't count? It doesn't count toward that daily allowance of 6 tablespoons or 6. I always confuse teaspoons and tablespoons. 6 teaspoons is what the World Health Organization. Most Americans are by far above that. But when you're talking about the fruit that comes from, or the sugar that comes from fruit in its whole form and vegetables, it doesn't count because it comes with the fiber and the nutrients. And the fiber slows down digestion because it's bulky and it's difficult to digest. It takes calories to digest, and so there's no extra added on. You're not going to put on extra weight if you eat a ton of fruit, because your body won't let you eat a ton of fruit because of the brain satiation, because of the fiber triggering the leptin mechanism and giving you the full feeling. That's why when it's food. I mean, do this challenge yourself. Try to sit down and eat 5 oranges or 5 glasses of orange juice and see which one, and until you're full. Your body at maybe 1.5, 2 oranges, you're going to say, okay, I'm good. You could drink all 5 glasses of orange juice and still want more, because leptin is not triggered in the juice. It is triggered in the fruit because of the fiber, the nutrients, and the whole mechanism of digestion. So fruits and vegetable sugars don't count.
Right. But once it gets juiced into a juice, it's no longer the same. So juice is completely different. The sugar in a glass of orange juice is the same, really, if you ate a chocolate bar.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So things to consider, guys. And by the way, there's great resources out there where you can become more educated. You can learn more about sugar. I mean, we did this in our preparation for this call. There's an amazing movie that it's a documentary on YouTube. It's the truth about sugar. So make sure that you go and find that on YouTube.
There's another movie called That Sugar Movie,
yeah,
which walks people through substituting what they're normally eating for actual teaspoons of sugar. It's almost like Super Size Me. It's kind of a documentary type, but it's called That Sugar Movie. It's another great resource.
Yeah. So the reasons why we think that we need something sweet is because we're like trained from birth that things have to taste good in a certain way, and sugar's in those things. And then the other one is the addictive aspect that comes within our brains from that reward.
We need that dopamine.
Yep. All right. So let's move to question number 4, which is, what can high levels of sugar consumption lead to? Well, beyond what we've already talked about, right? First of all, energy, quick energy. Yes. But if you don't burn that energy properly and all the way out, then it is going to turn into fat. And the more you add on top of fat over fat over fat, you become obese. And obesity is, I would say, it's the number 1 killer, because it leads to all of the top. It leads to all the top killers. So obesity is one of the top concerns with sugar consumption. Little grains of sugar can lead to being obese, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time.
That's true. It's one of the top comorbidities in every disease is obesity, or that leads to many diseases. Obesity is a great foundation to build disease on.
Yeah. And then we've got the actual diseases. We've got diabetes, right? We've got heart disease. We've got fatty liver disease.
They kind of go in a progression. So if you look at, let's just say 2 people, one of them is an alcoholic and drinks high amounts of carbohydrates in the form of fermented beverages known as alcohol. They can, because again, it goes through that same thing. Whatever that carbohydrate turns it into glucose. Glucose is used in the cells to create ATP. Whatever's left over is going to go store in the liver as glycogen. Whatever's left over after that is going to store in the fat cells as glycogen and amino acids, and whatever left over after that's going to get dumped into, or making into protein, making muscles, and then dumped over into the urine. But as you go through that, there's not a lot of good nutrients in alcohol. There's no fiber in alcohol. So it quickly stores and you use it up very quickly. But what happens is we develop some like liver issues because of the glycogen storage in liver. And we develop it's called fatty liver disease. We can develop cirrhosis of the liver caused by alcoholism. Same kind of pathology in someone who doesn't drink alcohol, but let's say is a chocoholic. Like I could be that way. Chocolate is like my nemesis. I love chocolate, but I have to say no, and I have to have a willpower over chocolate. But people that give into sweet things, syrupy drinks, sweet drinks, cakes, cookies, pastas, breads, grains, things of that nature, what happens is they go through the same process as the alcoholic did, but it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver. Same overindulgence in carbohydrates. The choice of the indulgence is the differing part, or makes the difference. And then there's other things that leads to, so liver issues, putting more strain on the heart because of obesity, challenging the heart, leading to cardiac issues, challenging the entire system, challenging the pancreas, challenging the insulin receptors, challenging the whole process, leading to diabetes. And which are all can be terminal if you don't handle them properly, or if you don't live within the wellness paradigm and turn those things around. It's voluntarily eating and eating and eating these things, or drinking and drinking these things, which can lead to liver issues, which can turn into cardiac issues, obesity issues, diabetes, the ultimate pathway to that. And it's just, and none of it's good.
And you can keep on going too, because sugar feeds cancers.
Yeah, it does. Oh yeah, of course it does.
Sugar rots your brain. I'm sure that your parents my mother told me that when I was younger. It's like, sugar's going to rot your brain, not just your teeth. It's going to rot your brain, and it really does. It will affect your brain and how it works. The higher amounts of sugar that you consume.
I don't know why. This is probably a super silly visual, but it just came to me. If you ever remember the cartoon Popeye, what did he eat to make him strong? Spinach. Imagine that it's not Popeye, it's a cancer cell. And it's not spinach, it's sugar. So your sugar consumption, if you have cancer or a tendency to have cancer, your sugar consumption does to cancer what spinach does to Popeye. Makes them stronger. It is one of the favorite fuels and foods of cancer is sugar. So just say no.
Yeah, or at least reduce it, right? Or reduce it, or find better options, right? If you're somebody that drinks soda every single day, find something different to drink and increase your water, because you need to be flushing out what you've already put in there as well. So just know that there's a lot more information out there. Like I mentioned before, The Truth About Sugars on YouTube. What was the name of the one you said?
That sugar movie.
That sugar movie. You can just put in, and just Google it, and you can find all kinds of amazing information about sugar, why you need to be careful about what kinds you're consuming, how much you're consuming, and why you should really cut back.
Right. And I want to maybe dispel a little myth about natural sources of sugar versus synthetic, or that's what I'm looking for. Not synthetic. Artificial forms of sugars. Just because a sugar is natural, because the sugar in orange juice and oranges is natural, it's much better for you when you take it in the form of an orange versus in the form of orange juice. It's much easier on your body, and ultimately it's for longevity, it's better. But what about, you mentioned earlier when we started, cane? Sugar cane is where sugar comes from. And then it can be turned into, you can have it as purified, where they take out the molasses, I don't know where molasses comes from necessarily, but like maple syrup is the sap of a tree. Just because it's a natural form. Or honey. Honeybees make honey. Honey is a very good source of sweetness. It has more nutrients in it than regular sugar, but it can be very problematic for you. And it is a natural source. So just because something comes from nature, or because it comes from nature, plants, or whatever, it doesn't make it good. it makes it okay in small amounts, but when you overindulge, it's still going to be bad. But here's the interesting thing about it. There can be some synthetic or artificial sweeteners that in small doses are also not good for you. Some of them can be good for you or okay for you, and others can be very toxic to you. So we're in an episode coming up, we're going to really dive deep into artificial sweeteners. We're going to talk about the pink packet and the blue packet and the yellow packet and the green packet and the white packet and the tan colored packet and all the different options you have in sweeteners. Most of them, we put them into beverages or on our food. So if it's on breakfast food or on some type of food or in our tea or coffee or something like that is where we seek those things out, which is the biggest consumption of those things. Some of them are okay. Some of them can be very problematic.
Yeah, my favorite actually is stevia leaf.
I like stevia.
I like stevia leaf. I don't like the other one that comes from stevia, but I love stevia leaf. But yeah, so we'll dive deeper into that on a future episode of Wellness Foreplay. But guys, if you got any benefit out of this whatsoever, will you please make sure that you go and share this with someone that you care about? If you're listening on podcast, please give us a review, 5-star preferred, and then share this out, because we need to get these messages out that every single one of you can be 1% better. And we're just trying to share with you just information, just pick little things here and there. As a matter of fact, I would actually challenge all of you today that have listened to this and will be listening to this to go and track your sugar consumption for a 24-hour time period, just to see how much sugar you're consuming in the regular foods that you eat, and then consider making some changes, because six teaspoons is not very much. It's not very much. And yet that
Every
is
day it's got a big compound.
Yeah, it compounds and it builds up over time. So anything you'd like to add before we close out of here?
Increase your hydration and increase your physical activity as well. Helps burn more calories, helps keep your cells hydrated, and that will minimize your hunger cravings, because hunger is where a lot of the times we cheat, because we want instant gratification. We get the dopamine rush. We go into the pantry, into the fridge, get something quick. And a lot of times quick can be problematic. So just be a better educate yourself, be a better healthcare consumer, read the labels, and try to minimize as much sugar as possible.
And one final thing I need to say here, healthy people have a much less chance of getting sick from anything. So I really think that it needs to be a top priority for every single one of us to be healthy. And we just want to give you some information that you can start with. So guys, thanks so much for joining us on today, episode 35 of the Wellness Foreplay podcast. We want to make sure that you also know that you can contact us through dondiandmarcy.com. You can give us episode ideas. You can find out about our biohacking regimen, as well as find links to these podcasts. So that you can go and listen to them over and over and over again, not just see it in the visual form. All right. So we appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for joining us.
Have a great day. We'll see you next episode.
See ya.